What's going on, chess friends? It's Rafi Chowdhury here with another video, and in today's video we're going to discuss a little bit about the basic ideas in the English opening. Now I do want to mention that this is going to be a very short video that's just going to teach you the basic ideas of what the English opening is, what it does, just so you can get familiar with what the opening is. It is not a thorough or instructive, fully instructive, all-in idea of the English at all. It's just the basic concepts for the average person who just wants to start playing the opening right away. So English opening starts with the move pawn to c4 as the first move from white. And black, obviously, what white is trying to do with this move, obviously, he's trying to control the light square on d4, and he's putting a pawn on the light square on c4, or sorry, d5 rather. So the whole opening is actually revolved around the idea of controlling these light squares. So it's a light square control strategy type of opening. And what white is going to do is basically start at some point a queenside attack in most cases in the English. So black can respond in many different ways. He can play knight f6, e6. He can play f5 with the Dutch. He can play c5, which is more of the symmetric variation. He can play d5, which is kind of like a Grünfeld or Scandinavian sort of way to play against it. He can play e5, of course, and go into the like a reverse Sicilian sort of method. You can play knight f6, g6, bishop g7, d6, and transpose into a King's Indian sort of attack. He can play b6 as well with the Queen's Indian sort of setup. There's so many different ways to play against the English. But I think the most popular way to respond nowadays, at least, is to play knight to f6. I'm going to move this here so you guys can see the opening book. And then white has many different responses. Of course, he can transpose into just a queen's pawn with d4. He can play knight f3. He can play knight c3. He can play g3. He can play e3 with d4. He can play all types of things. The way I like to play the English is I like to play the move g3 as my next move. Why is that? Because I want to quickly get the bishop on the long diagonal right here and immediately start putting pressure on black's queen side right off the bat. So black has, again, made different options, but I think the most common options typically include e4 or g6 or something like d6. Sometimes black goes into the c5 line here as well. But let's just look at g6 here, and what you're going to do is put the bishop on g7, or sorry, bishop on g2, and you're going to control. You start controlling these light squares right off the bat. And black does somewhat a similar thing. He plays bishop to g7. He wants to control these dark squares as well. So here the most common move, I think, is knight to c3. Although it's not a move that you have to play, you can also play knight to f3 if you want. But typically knight to c3 is played first, just keeping the control of the light square of bishop for as long as possible before putting the knight on f3. Black will typically castle in this position, and then white will typically play the knight to f3 or play the pawn to e4. And if you play e4, you're still in the English opening. It's just more of like the Catalan sort of structure. Actually, it might be called a Catalan at that point. But typically what I do is I play knight to f3. And then in this case, black can play d5 right away if he wants to. Oftentimes, black doesn't choose to do that, and he plays pawn to d6. And then as white, what we want to do is we can play d4 again to control the center, but another move obviously to consider, which is very common, is to castle. And now black can again transpose with c5. He can do all sorts of things. He can go into the symmetric. But typically, black chooses moves like e5 here. He's playing this King's Indian sort of structure against it. So the way I play the English personally, again, you can play d4 as computer is suggesting, but I I usually play the move d3, which is basically continuing with the overall theme of just controlling these light squares. As you can see that every light square is being attacked by our pawns and pieces. At some point, we may reroute the knight to e1 and also open up the bishop here as well. Now this knight right here typically wants to come into the queen side at some point to help with the queen side expansions. Like we're going to play a3, rook b1, b4, b5, a4, a5, a6, and just basically try to attack this king side, queen side structure here. So this knight oftentimes comes to e1, goes to c2. Sometimes it could maybe even go to e3 and to d5 as well. But typically, you want to attack in the direction that your pawn chain is facing. So in this case, obviously, the white's pawn chain is facing towards the queen side. So it makes sense that white would attack this way, and black's pawn chain is facing towards the king side. So it makes sense that black, in this particular setup that he's chosen, will play moves like knight e8 or knight d7. He'll play f5, f4, g5, g4. He will play knight, c6, maybe to e7 to g6, and he'll continue some sort of a king side attack. Very typical of the King's Indian setup. So the next move, the most common move here for black is usually something like knight to c6, and then the best move for white in this position, I believe, is to play rook to b1. And this move might seem really strange if you don't understand the idea, but again, like I said, the main idea is to get the rook on this b file so we can start pushing b4, b5, and immediately start attacking this queen side. In this case, black typically plays moves like a5 to try to stop this from expansion from happening. And we can follow this up with a move like a3. Black will often develop, let's just say he develops his last piece. He can also play So another idea in the oftentimes is to play the move bishop to g5 to pin this knight and to exchange the bishop for the knight. So we have greater control of the d5 square. So black doesn't really want that to happen. That's why a lot of times black will play the move h6 to try to stop the pin from happening and trading off the trade of this bishop for that knight. In these kind of structures, black does not want that to happen. So if black does that, white will continue with his plan of expansion on the queen side. And then here, yeah, b4 is the most popular move, and then black typically captures. And then white can capture back as well. And this is basically, now we reach pretty much, we're kind of coming out of the opening phase of the English, and now different ways of attacking possibilities exist. So obviously in this kind of setup that black will play moves like king to h7 at some point. Maybe he'll probably play knight to d7 or knight to h5 or knight to e8, and he'll play knight to e8, and he'll play f5 and f4 and start to break up this king side structure. A typical plan for black also is to play the bishop to e6 or d7, play queen to c8, and play bishop c3 to exchange off these bishops. And since white's bishop is really, really strong in this kind of structure, because it's controlling so many squares in this on this long diagonal, h1 to a8 diagonal, oftentimes one thing you could do is actually play the rook to e1, so that if black were to play bishop to h3, you can put your bishop on h1 and hide it. And instead of trading the bishops off, you can actually save that bishop. And this bishop oftentimes will eye this kind of pawn on h6, especially if black has played moves like h6. Bishop can also be fianchettoed sometimes as well. The queen typically will go to move like a square like c2, maybe e2 in some cases, or d2. And sometimes it comes to b3. If the rook is not there, oftentimes the queen can even come to a4 as a possibility as well. So once black gets his attack going, black will often play like queen to e8. And once these pawns that move out of the way, he can play queen to h5 as well and start attacking on this side of the board here. So yeah, this pretty much sums up the basic idea of the English. There's obviously different ways of countering the English, and we just looked at one particular common system. There's so much to cover here, but I just want to give you guys a basic idea of what the English opening is, what the typical ideas are for white. And again, depending on black's choice of moves, obviously things can go different. But at least now you know the first few moves, and you can go ahead and start playing the opening. And as you played, you can learn a little bit more about different types of ways that black can counteract the English. A lot of times black will actually play an early d5, which is actually one way that black tries to get equality out of the English, and that does kind of mess up the queenside attack that white might go for. So those are some things that you can look into as well, and I'll try to cover some of that in the future videos as well, but this is just an intro video. Thank you guys again for watching. Hopefully that you found this helpful, and if there's any questions or comments that you guys have, leave it in the comments below, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Till then, take care, and we'll see you soon.